we're very happy to be hosting this webinar today, talking about our Outstanding Legacy Circle. And it's really because we want to expand what we're doing. Like, we know that the fight that Outright is fighting for global human rights for LGBTIQ people everywhere, that is a fight that will go on for a long time. And so the fit with Outright's Legacy Circle is really ideal. We know the organization is going to be needed way beyond, so I'm thinking way beyond my lifetime, because I know how challenging it is to change how people see LGBTIQ people and ensure human rights for everyone everywhere. That's going to take a long time, so the work's going to have to continue for a long time. I don't know how familiar you are with Outright, but we're a 31-year-old global human rights organization focused on LGBTIQ populations. We currently have board and staff in 11 countries. And when we describe how we do our work, we often say that we do research and data collection because you need the proof in order to convince people that things need to change. We do advocacy. That's how we change things. We convince people that things are wrong and they need to be fixed. And we support the grassroots LGBTIQ movement because we believe that without that movement, there is no change that's going to happen. If people aren't demanding the change, it's not going to happen. And we're very fortunate to have incredible board leadership and expert speakers today who will go through much more sort of details than I can provide. But I want to just say something about the Outstanding Legacy Circle. So we launched it formally in 2020 in honor of our 30th anniversary. And so far, more than 50 donors have joined. And I mean, since Outright was founded in 1990, we have, of course, seen enormous progress in advancing human rights and equality for LGBTIQ people around the world. But all of those gains and all of those wins have been very hard won. And we know, like I said, we know that this work is going to have to continue for a very long time before we can achieve our vision of full human rights and equality for LGBTIQ people everywhere. And so we're going to have to keep up the fight. And Outright has been at the forefront of this fight for the last 30 years. And for the next 30 years and beyond, we're going to be there. And so that's why we need, and that's why we want to have the Outstanding Legacy Circle, because that is part of that, as part of funding the movement going forward. Thank you so much for joining today. And I am now going to hand it over to my colleague, Chandler Bazemore, Senior Development Manager with Outright. Chandler, please.
Thank you, Maria. And thank you, everyone, for taking the time to be here with us. From our panelists to our attendees, we truly appreciate you sharing your time with us. And we hope that it's going to be an informative and enjoyable afternoon for everyone. I love being a part of Outright, and I love working with donors who support us and our broader movement. I'm thrilled that Outright has launched this program and very happy to moderate our conversation today. One little housekeeping note before we get started. We'll take time to answer questions or ask for questions later, but in the time being, if you do have a question, feel free to put it in the chat dialog box and we'll make sure that we get to them. So if anything is on your mind and it's pressing and you don't want to forget it, just jot it there. We'll make sure that we get to it and address your question. I'd like to first start off by introducing our illustrious panel and acknowledging that not only are they incredibly accomplished professionals and experts, but they're all outright donors. So that is an amazing commitment. Thank you to all of them for that commitment. And then I'd just like for them to introduce themselves, and to play a little icebreaker, I like to ask one of my favorite questions. Why do you personally support Outright? And we'll start off with Sarah Anderson. Sarah is a VP at Campbell and Company. Sarah, why do you personally support Outright?
Thanks so much, Chandler. It's great to be here with everybody today, and I appreciate everyone making the time to chat about Outright. For me, I'm probably one of the newer Outright supporters, certainly on the panel, if not on the call. A very good friend of mine, I'm up in Seattle, and a very good friend of mine invited me to one of Outright's events here right before the pandemic began. I think it was the last fundraiser that I went to before everything started to shut down. So I have very fond memories of actually being in a room with other people and doing that fundraiser thing, which was fun. And so that was really my first introduction to Outright just a couple of years ago. And I was so impressed to just learn more, hear some stories about the impact that Outright has had around the world. And as I've gotten to know the organization better and understand the really strategic and thoughtful way that Outright approaches its work in each country, in which it is going in and really making an impact, I've been so impressed just to see more about how they actually enact that on the ground. So happy to be an Outright supporter, given how impactful the work is all around the world.
That's great. Thank you, Sarah. I love the reference to life before COVID. The next person that we would like to go on to is Deb Kinney. Deb is of counsel at Johnston, Kinney, and Zulaica, LLP. Deb, what do you think?
Thanks, Chandler, and thanks everyone for joining. I've been a longtime fan of Outright, back even when the days when it was called IGLHRC. And in fact, when I was in law school in San Francisco, where this organization was founded, and a baby attorney volunteering at the NCLR, I became aware of the beginnings of IGLHRC and have been really impressed over the years by how much it's grown, the mission that it undertakes. And I was thinking about this because Chandler, just as much as it's an icebreaker, I'll let you all know that he gave us the question ahead of time. So I was pondering it this morning, and it seemed to me that Outright is probably the largest LGBTQ organization in the world doing what it does, and it made me really thankful that it is as solid and as stable as it is, because this is the organization that's actually responsible probably for most of the bilateral negotiations throughout the world right now. And we just got off an administration that would have left all LGBTQ people behind if they could have. And but for an organization like this that gives not only legitimacy to our efforts and our desires worldwide, and literally is interacting with other governments and other people and groups and everybody throughout the world to try and maintain some semblance of acceptance, and at worst case, keeping people out of jail, and at best case, advancing human rights and spurring organizations on the ground into action to get equality in those countries. There would be a big hole in the playing field if Outright wasn't doing the amount of work that they're doing. So I'm continually grateful for the organization and have been both a longtime supporter personally and from our business. And then of course we lend a hand whenever we're asked. So anyway, thanks again for inviting me for today.
Thank you, Deb. And I thought that was privileged information from legal counsel, but I will check with our next guest, John Heiman, who is a law professor and an Outright board member. John, we can talk offline about my legal rights, but share how you became involved with Outright and why you support Outright.
Hi, Chandler. I don't think you have any confidentiality with respect to what you sent to the three of us. Like Deb, I was a fan of IGLHRC before it became Outright and participated in organizing programs in my capacity as a city council member in the city of West Hollywood. And we had a human rights speaker series, and we would focus on international LGBT issues, usually once a year. And that meant that we always called somebody from Outright to participate, either Paula Edelbrick or Jessica Stern or Maria, somebody from Outright would be there to talk about the global effort to secure rights for the LGBTQI community. And part of my involvement in Outright is really because I'm blessed to be in Southern California, in West Hollywood, where we have a large LGBTQ community. And I feel so fortunate that I have the security of being in a community like this. But I know that people all around the world don't have that, and they don't even have the opportunity to see a rainbow flag or to go to a program that focuses on LGBTQI rights. So part of my involvement is because I think it's important that everyone has that opportunity, that freedom, that ability to fulfill their capacity as a human being. And I want to make sure that when I'm gone, that my involvement continues on. That's part of why I really pushed for this legacy circle. I really want to make sure that all of us recognize the fight is not going to be over during our lifetimes. It really is going to go on for many generations.
That's wonderful. And thank you all. I love hearing those stories. So for today, our goals are really simple. One, we want to share information about the OutStanding Legacy Circle. Two, we want to give some context about giving within the LGBTI community. Three, share some basics around planned giving and answer your questions. And four, share some personal stories about why some of our supporters have already joined the OutStanding Legacy Circle. We're going to spend roughly the next 30 minutes or so asking some questions, and I think it will be interesting and inspiring. We'll try to move on to your questions as quickly as possible. And again, you can add in your questions in the Q&A and chat. So let's start with a little bit of context. So Sarah, you've done a lot of research and work in our field in terms of collecting information about philanthropy within the LGBTI community and specifically around planned giving. Could you share some of those highlights with us? What do we know about LGBTIQ donors and the giving for the movement? What do we know about planned giving in our community? Sarah?
Thanks, Chandler. And I can't claim all the credit for the research that I'm going to be sharing. Actually, a lot of it comes from my wife as well. So in my profession, I am doing fundraising consulting for nonprofit organizations, and that's included some deep work and research in the LGBTIQ field through some work with Horizons Foundation, the Haas Jr. Fund, and others to really understand, what motivates donors to give to the movement. But my wife is a professor in philanthropic studies, and she has also done quite a bit of research on same-sex couples charitable giving was her dissertation topic, and she's done some work specifically around planned giving research and how LGBTIQ donors consider leaving a legacy through their giving. So I'll be drawing on research from both of our areas of work, and as you can imagine, we're kind of insufferable when we get started talking about this kind of thing, but we certainly enjoy it. So first and foremost, as we just kind of consider what we know about planned gift donors in general, and not specific to the LGBTIQ community, but planned gift donors across the general population. One thing that we know is that on average, donors tend to establish their first planned gift to a charitable organization when they're about 53 years old. And most donors do that when they write their first will. Sometimes folks will add a gift in when they're revising their will or establishing another type of gift a little later on. But we do know that LGBTIQ folks actually make their first gifts, their first planned gifts quite a bit earlier, at 50 as opposed to 53, which doesn't sound like that huge of a difference, but in the world of research is pretty meaningful, significant difference there. And one of the theories for why some of that has been the case is that for many years we did not have federal recognition of our marriages, so estate planning was a really important and essential way to protect our families. I know my wife and I established our first wills and first planned gifts when we were in our 20s, which felt like a very adult thing to do, in our early 20s. But that's certainly the case for a lot of folks, I think, in our community. We also know that LGBTIQ folks and couples are significantly less likely to have children than the general population. 2/3 of LGBTIQ families don't have children, although that gap is narrowing. We're certainly seeing that, that tide start to shift a bit. However, not having children is the single biggest predictor of leaving a charitable gift through your estate. If you don't have a child or any children at all, you are 3 times more likely than someone with a child to leave a planned gift. We also know that folks in our community have opted to support organizations through their estate plans or other kinds of planned gifts, and they're much more open to doing that than the general population. In general, as we look at all across the country, about 5% of folks in the United States have said that they've made a planned gift to a charitable organization. But when we look specifically at LGBTIQ donors, 16% have already committed to making a gift specifically to an LGBTIQ organization, an organization within the movement, not to mention other organizations that they might be supporting. And about 1/3 of people who had not yet done that within the LGBTIQ community said that they would be likely to or would consider making a planned gift. So certainly a lot of openness to the idea of leaving a legacy, through charitable planned gifts. And when we look at the high net worth population of donors, what we found is that it's a little bit, it tends to be a little bit higher in the general high net worth population, that folks tend to have left or made some sort of arrangements for a charitable gift. In the general population of folks with high net worth, 9% have made a charitable gift through their estate. And when we look specifically at high net worth LGBTIQ donors, there's a huge distinction there. 37% had at least one planned gift in place. So a lot of real strength and real generosity flowing from the LGBTIQ community when we think about the ways that all of us are thinking about our legacies and making arrangements for that in our estate plans. LGBTIQ folks are more likely than the general population to establish very specific types of planned gifts, including bequests, which are often considered one of the easiest ways to set up a planned gift. A charitable trust, which has a little bit more complexity to it, but is another way that folks often choose to support an organization, or a donor advised fund. So those are some of the vehicles that our community tends to sort of lean into when thinking about planned gifts. And we're also more likely to go back and revise our plans, after we've actually established a gift. And we're doing that, typically because we're increasing either the value of the gifts or the number of gifts that we're making. So I'm going back, rethinking those plans, and deciding to contribute more, toward organizations through our estate plans. And then kind of stepping aside from some of the planned gift specifics, just to think a little bit more about what are some of the things that motivate our community to give? What do we know about what really drives us as a community? We know that folks in the LGBTIQ community are more likely to support advocacy work than the general population. So that certainly speaks to a lot of what Outright does so exceptionally well. We're motivated by work that is aiming to end discrimination and persecution. Again, something right up Outright's alley, and ending violence and hate crimes. Those are all strong motivations that our community has, and this really stemming from this sense of wanting to give others an easier path than we may have had ourselves, or wanting to extend positions of privilege that we may be sitting in to others who don't have that same freedom or justice available to them. So those are some of the pieces of motivations that have been especially strong and a strong thread for our community. And one other thing, just returning back to planned gifts, because I know we're going to talk a little bit about what it actually looks like to kind of consider and establish a planned gift. One thing that my wife's research found is that it's easier than you think. 68% of planned gift donors who had already established a gift said that the process of establishing it was easy or very easy. So that's something to keep in mind as you're thinking about establishing a planned gift yourself, and maybe feeling a little bit daunted by the process. You can certainly go off the deep end of very complex gifts, but if you want to set up something quick and easy, there are a lot of options for doing that, which I know we'll be speaking to in just a few minutes.
Wow, that's great. Thanks, Sarah. As a self-admitted data wonk, I appreciate the numbers and all of that behind it. So that's very interesting. Deb, I'd like to move on to you, if we may, right now. And hopefully you can share some of your own insights about why estate planning is important from a client perspective, and perhaps highlight a few common plan-given strategies that donors are interested in. And if you have identified any unique trends as well.
All right, well, thank you. And I always love hearing Sarah speak and giving the data as well. So, you know, doing estate planning is something that people think they need to either be 50 or above, or they need to be rich to do. And in fact, in the LGBTQ community, it's been, as Sarah was alluding to, so much more important, because for a long time, we didn't have any rights. There was no backup. You know, if you're married now, which most of us couldn't be earlier, right? That there is a backup. The system does provide for most of your assets to either go to your spouse and or children if you have it. Now, if you don't do your estate planning deliberately and explicitly, it's a very cumbersome process for your spouse and your kids to inherit. So most people want to clean up that mess before it happens and just write down their wishes. I mean, you can still leave everything to your spouse or your partner or your best friend or do whatever. But if you do it through a written document, it's going to be a lot less arduous and a lot less complex to get it there. There are a couple basic types of estate plan giving that people do. They'll do either wills or trusts. Those are in essence the same thing. They say, where do you want your assets to go? Many more people use trusts than wills because trusts have incapacity provisions, meaning that if I become incapacitated and I already have a trust, whoever I've designated as the successor trustee can step in and manage those assets for me. And I do believe, especially from watching my clientele over many years, that many of us are living longer in our bodies than our minds. And so there's a good chance, they say 2 out of the 3 of us on these calls will end up with no capacity, ultimately, if we live long enough. So having something in place to manage the affairs is probably even more important at this point than, you know, everybody's impending death, especially at age 50. And then, so if you only do a will, you have to go through the probate court. Now, the probate court is handled by the various states. And in some states, it's like $15 in 15 minutes, New Jersey, for instance. In California, it's years and thousands of dollars to get through probate. And so it's something that we really try to avoid for the most part in California. And so the revocable living trust is a good alternative. Now, both of these documents can say, hey, I want to give 30% to my best friend from college. I want to give 40% to my longtime partner, and I want another 30% to go to charity, right? And then that's how you can make a gift. It's just, it is that simple. And Sarah is right. It can be very easy, or it can be even easier. And that's pretty simple. When you're doing your estate planning, I'm going to urge everyone, and on this call especially, if you do not have your healthcare directives in place, especially after 2 years of living through a pandemic, if that's the case, then you are a class A procrastinator, and I'm going to urge you to get over that and to get your healthcare directives done. And with that, a HIPAA release, because no one can take care of you if you don't have that done. The HIPAA laws are so much more stringent now that it precludes almost anyone from getting information on you, even a spouse. And people don't realize that. They think, oh, I'm married, my spouse has all the rights in the world. That's not true when it comes to medical decisions, because those rights are individual. So make sure you have that. And then the one other document that I'll urge everybody, and I'm sure after a 2-year pandemic, everybody's got all their T's crossed and their I's dotted, but is getting your power of attorney in place. And that just says who can jump into your shoes, run around town and do your work for you in the event of an incapacity, like pay your insurance, pay your phone bill, switch over to a different carrier, subscribe to a lot more channels at home, you know, the day-to-day stuff that you might have to do. When it comes to plan giving, there's a lot of simple ways to get on the train, if you will. So let's say you've already done your trust and your will, and you're now deciding that you actually do want to leave a gift outright. Well, if you've had the benefit of working and in a environment where you have a retirement account, for instance, whether it's a 403B or a 401k, an IRA, it doesn't matter. You can actually designate a charitable organization as the beneficiary of part or all of those accounts. And sometimes that's the best alternative for people, because you have to remember those tax deferred accounts, if you live long enough to use them, every time you get a distribution, they're taxable income. So you're only keeping 70 cents on the dollar if you're lucky, right? And if you leave them to another human, when they take distributions, they too need to pay those distributions. And it's added to the income they're already making. So sometimes they're only keeping 50 cents on the dollar. So leaving those dollars to charity is actually what we call a leverage gift. And let me just further elaborate by saying, if I have $100,000 in my trust account or my bank account, and I have $100,000 in my IRA, you would rather receive the $100,000 as a human out of my trust account or my bank account because you owe no tax on that. If you receive the $100,000 out of my IRA, you're only going to get to keep 67,000, 70,000, maybe less than that. So it's a win-win for everybody. The dollars that would have otherwise gone to pay taxes go directly to a charitable organization. They get to keep 100% of every dollar. Win-win. Okay. Plus, it's super easy to change online. You can literally, while you're on this phone call, go onto your bank account, your 401b, your 403b, your 401k, and just add outright in as a donor for either a dollar amount or a percentage of that account. And people say, well, I can't give it away now. You're not giving it away now. It only happens in the event of your death. So if you live long enough, let's say you live to 109, that account's going to be gone. You will have spent it, right? So you're not putting anything at risk about your own care by doing this. There are more complex vehicles for plan giving. Typically, that's for people who have taxable estates and they're trying to get money out of their estates now. Some of those gifts will go 20 years from now. Some will go only at death. We call them split interest gifts a lot, the charitable trusts, because typically they're benefiting a human and a charity. It could be that you have appreciated Starbucks stock, right? Or you have some other stock that you no longer want to hold on to because you're realizing that in fact they're funding private prisons or they're not doing anything around racial justice and it doesn't comport with your values. So you may want to sell those stocks, but if you did, you'd pay a huge amount of tax. So what you can do is you can take those appreciated stocks that you don't want anymore or don't need anymore, and you can place them in something called like a charitable remainder trust. The trust sells the stock and none of the capital gain is paid at that moment. So if I have $1 million worth of stock with a $300,000 basis and I sell it today, I'm going to be paying almost $200,000 in tax, right? So I'd only have $800,000 left to give. But if I throw that money into a trust and that gets to keep the whole $1 million, reinvest it in other stocks that actually comport with my values to date. And then the income, you have a choice on a charitable remainder trust or a charitable lead trust. Either the income goes to humans for the duration of life, it could come back to you. Remainder goes to charity. So if you only live one more year, charity gets a lot. If you live a whole bunch of years, charity may not get so much, but it's invested in the market. So in theory, it's keeping up with the market. The charitable lead trust is the opposite, where it actually pays income to charity for 20 years or a period less, or for a lifetime. You can decide that based upon your age and the interest rates and everything else. And then the remainder goes back to humans. So it's a great way to transfer wealth to people who especially are younger, because you can zero out the gift tax by making it a 20-year term, okay? So I know that might have been confusing for a few people, but what I wanna say is basically there are a whole host of ways for you to support the work you wanna do, to leave a legacy in the community, and to really make sure that the dollars that you work so hard to earn will make an impact and a difference. One of the trends that I've seen with my clients, especially around same-sex couples, especially older ones, and I'm not going to define what older is anymore, is that they'll walk in and I'll say, so, you know, if both of you get run over by the COVID bus tomorrow, where's your money go? And they go, well, I don't know. Just leave it to my siblings. And I'll say, do you like your siblings? And they'll say, well, not really. And I say, well, why would you want to leave them all this money? And they'll say to me, well, don't I have to? Or shouldn't I? And I'm like, I've come to the conclusion, and I don't actually have a spouse that does great research on this, but I'll tell you my own pop psychology, non-published opinion on this, is that it's internalized homophobia. And we don't give credence to our families of choice to the same value that are given to biological families, even when we have been rejected by those families, or we're not warm and fuzzy with those families, or they don't have the greatest of import. And it's not that we don't love them because we're supposed to. We grew up in the same house, we shared parenting. It wasn't all so bad. Sometimes the stories are a lot worse. But I often sit and have really deep conversations with people about what's meaningful to them. Like, how did they grow up? Like, what did they face growing up? And do they want to make the world a better place for the next generation? And gay youth is obviously something that a lot of people feel very close to, because their youthful experiences were particularly difficult the older they are, typically. And so, and in estate planning, it's not either or, it's always a both and. You can leave some to charity and some to the family you don't like, or you can leave a lot to the family you actually do like, and you can still leave some to charity. Your niece or nephew is not going to know the difference, most likely, between a $175,000 gift and a $200,000 gift. But that extra $25,000 going straight to charity will make a huge difference. Think about the number of lives it impacts, especially with outrights work in foreign countries, where $25,000 can fund an entire program or an entire initiative in a different country. And it is the power of the collective, of planned giving and of giving generally, that actually enriches the world and really makes a difference. None of us have to give our entire estate to any one charity. If you do, more power to you. But if we do give what we can give, and usually stretch a little bit more, because remember, by the time we're talking plan giving, by the time this goes, you're not here anymore. You don't need it. And sometimes that's really hard for people to grok, right? But most of us are worth more dead than alive. Most of us have insurance policies that only pay out if we're dead. Most of us have retirement accounts that we actually haven't accessed or used, so we think about them as a different bucket, and in the unfortunate circumstance that we're not here to use it, I urge people to think deep and hard about, what are they trying to say? What do they want to leave? What kind of a world do they envision? What's important to them? And then do something about that. We see how fast money can be wasted by humans. We see how well money is spent by organizations like Outright. So anyway, thanks. That's probably more than you wanted.
No, thank you, Deb. That was amazing. And as usual, I learned so much from listening to you and you sharing that. And I think there are going to be a lot of introspective glances across the Thanksgiving table this year of, do I like you enough to leave my money to you? So I think you've given us a new game to play at Thanksgiving dinner. So John, you shared in the beginning how you came to be involved with Outright and a little bit of what motivated you to join the board and to really start this initiative. Can you speak a little bit more about your own personal planned giving, if you don't mind, just the vehicles that you've chosen and maybe why they fit into your particular viewpoint?
Thanks, Chandler. I'm still recovering from Deb's comment that I'm worth more dead than alive. So I'll try to recover from that and talk a little bit about my own estate planning. Deb did such a great job of giving the overview. I want to add one other thing, and that is if you don't have any of these estate documents, if you don't have a will, if you don't have a trust, what happens to your money when you die? Well, in each state, there are systems set up that dictate where that money goes. If you have a spouse, it will likely go to your spouse. If you have children and no spouse, it will go to your children. If you don't have a spouse or children, which is my situation, then the money goes to your nearest relatives. In my case, my brother. And I love my brother, you know, occasionally and sometimes, except during election season when he sends me things from Breitbart News and Fox News and things like that. But if I were to not have my estate organized, he would get all of my money. And his values are not my values. Creating a estate allows me to give him some money to provide for other relatives that I do care about and provide for other friends that I care about, but also make sure that my money is going to support my values after I'm gone. I want to make sure that everyone understands that it really is in your best interest to have an estate plan, whether it's a simple will or whether it's a trust or it's a more complicated estate plan. You need to talk to a professional like Deb and make sure you've thought about what happens with your resources after you're dead. Now, I use the trust model because I think that's the most appropriate for me. And it allows me to provide for a fixed amount of money to go to certain relatives and other amounts to go to charity. Outright is one of the charities I support, and certainly I've decided to increase my support. The good thing about this is it's very easy to change. So each time my brother sends me one of those emails or sends me something I don't like, I can say, okay, this year when I update my estate, I'm going to increase my contributions to Outright and other organizations, and maybe his gift is going to decrease. But it also, I think it's a reflection that circumstances change with our family relationships. You might have new family members come into the picture, you might lose some. So it's always good to be getting your estate in order, but then each year reviewing it. And if appropriate, updating it. That way you can increase your gift to Outright or other organizations. You can increase your gifts to your friends and your family. Your situations will likely change. As I said earlier, my real commitment is to make sure that the resources that I have, and again, as Deb said, I'm probably going to be worth a lot more when I'm dead than when I'm alive, that those resources that I'm not using right now, that they're going to support the effort to secure global LGBTQ equality. I had the opportunity 2 years ago to go to Africa and to meet with one of those groups in a very resource poor country. And I know that, you know, $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 will change their entire outlook, and it will enable them to support more advocacy, support more work, and support just basic survival for members of the LGBT community. One of the things that I'm so proud of that Outright has done in the last 2 years during COVID, we raised money and we made grants all across the world to support these small LGBT organizations that are fighting in places where it is still illegal to be gay. It is illegal for people to be gathering together. It's illegal to have a rainbow flag and display it. And Outright has been there supporting those people and those organizations through this pandemic and beyond. So I am so proud of that work. And that's why I want to make sure that when I'm worth more than I am right now, that those funds continue to go and support the work that needs to be done to ensure equality. So that's a little bit about what I'm doing. But Deb reminded me I need to have my power of attorney for healthcare. So in case I start to become more incompetent than I already am. So thank you for that reminder, Deb.
Thank you. The gospel according to Deb, I think, is going to be a new section on our website. But thank you all for sharing your expertise. And I just want to open up to some questions for the entire panel, and you can jump in if you like. Is there anything that donors can do with their planned giving that they can't do in their annual giving? So a lot of our donors often reflect or think that it's a choice. They have to make a choice. Do I include them in my planned giving, or do I make an annual gift? So is there anything donors can do in one and not the other?
Well, I'll jump in and say they can do both.
And yes, and lifetime gifts and charitable gifts can mimic each other. It's just typically people can afford to give away more when they're not here. So, and the other thing about organizations, to be perfectly honest with you, by doing some annual gifting and getting on the email list and understanding how the organization works and functions, you have a much greater idea about what that organization's about and what size gift they really need. An organization like Outright is a mature organization that can actually handle large gifts. You take a small charity in your community that, has a staff of 3 people and a total budget of 180,000, they probably don't need $1 million. So it does help you to understand more about the size gift by being part of those organizations during your life.
I'll just underscore what both John and Deb said. And you can do both, and you can often do more when you're giving through planned gifts. So it's a great vehicle for folks to be able to maybe stretch to a level of giving that they're not able to through annual gifts or even through a major commitment.
And, Sarah, can I chime in, Chandler?
Yes.
But, based on your research, it's my understanding that if you have already chosen to leave a legacy gift to an organization, that it's actually really helpful to come out as a legacy donor and to let that be known. It doesn't commit you to anything. It doesn't mean that you can't change your mind later, but it means that those are your intentions now. And that actually is really helpful to bring in other legacy donors and to kind of give the legitimacy to, the outstanding legacy circle in this case, for instance. Is that what your research is finding?
Absolutely. And, we all hear sort of the story of, an organization receiving a bequest gift that they were not expecting from, someone who, was maybe giving $5, a year and really, wasn't on anybody's radar. But, as much as possible, when donors who have established a planned gift can share that with the organization, that does 2 things for the organization. It helps them plan for, what that might look like down the line. And as you said, Deb, it can be really motivating to other donors as well to sort of see how supporters are stepping up in that way. And for you as the donor, it plugs you in perhaps in new ways to the organization. You might get some additional information about what the organization is up to by virtue of being a planned gift donor and being a part of that society.
Well, and then
Go ahead, Deb.
Well, and I just wanted to jump in on that. Most people give, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah, because your research isn't going to be empirical. Mine is pop psychology. But most people give if they are asked to give. And not so many people are actually asked. And they actually, it's a great dinner time, as Chandler's saying, I love this Thanksgiving game, or dinner party game or salon game, but who do you give to? And this is what I'm doing. And a peer-to-peer ask is extremely powerful. But there's a lot of accountants and estate planning attorneys and everybody else who wants to just stay in their own lane to the point where they never even ask people about giving. I have so many clients over the years who said, wow, no one ever asked me to put a gift in my plan. What a great idea. And so I think it is important to talk about. Now, is it a 1-minute elevator speech? I've actually got that down too, but.
Yeah, it's such a good point, Devin. I mean, I wouldn't have gotten involved with Outright, if not for my friend who invited us to join for this fundraiser. So, that person-to-person connection and him saying to us, this is an organization I really care about and that I think you would also really appreciate the work that they're doing, was so meaningful to us, to get started in our support for Outright. My family, we around holidays, we're all talking about where do we want to make gifts, as a family or as gifts to one another, giving in honor of one another. So those conversations about giving are so important to sort of model for one another, what's meaningful in our lives. And the role of professional advisors in that, can't be overstated either. For someone who's involved with, helping set up estate plans, or financial advisors to say, have you considered how charity fits into your financial planning or into your estate planning, is a huge way to just get the wheels turning for people and have them think about what they can do through planned giving that they might not have otherwise considered.
I wanted to go back to this question of whether you should give now or give in your estate, and I said both. The great thing about donating now is that you can support particular initiatives that are happening right now. Like in the last 2 years, we had this COVID relief effort that Outright had sponsored, and we were able to generate a lot of support and donations for that. But I don't know where the crisis is going to be in 5 years or in 10 years or, after I'm gone. So I want to make sure that Outright also has the resources to respond to whatever the crisis is, 20 years from now, when I'm no longer here. So they will be able to determine, okay, we're seeing a crisis in, a particular region with anti-LGBT activity occurring. We can direct those resources there. Right now, I might want to support a particular program or project of Outright, but after I'm gone, I want to make sure that Outright and the board that follows me has the resources to direct them where they're most needed. And I think that's one of the reasons why I both give annually, and I also try to support Outright in my estate so that that legacy continues.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, John. And I think the one thing that comes to mind for me in response to that is, setting up gifts through your planned giving that don't have too many strings attached to them, that aren't so restrictive to a certain program or to a certain, geography or whatever it might be, that it really binds the hands of the organization. That's none of us have that crystal ball to know where the resources are going to be needed, once we're gone. So giving with, as much kind of flexibility within that is really powerful, to give the organization the opportunity to be nimble and respond. And Outright is so good at being nimble and responding where the need is greatest.
Thank you so much for all of those wonderfully kind words about Outright. And yes, definitely, we are an organization that responds quickly and nimbly. And your gifts allow us to do that, quite honestly. I want to open things up for questions. I saw that there weren't that many questions, or weren't any questions in the chat, but I just wanted to officially give some space for questions. If you do have any, definitely put them in the chat and we will address them. While we wait on that, I want to officially thank John, Deb, and Sarah for an enjoyable afternoon of information and insight. Thank you so much for all that you do for Outright and for the community at large. For our attendees, I want to invite you to reach out to us one-on-one. We can definitely have more in-depth conversations about planned giving and about estate planning. And actually, I love as one of our panelists phrased it, to create the society and the world that you want to live in, or you would like to live in. So we are open to having those conversations and encourage you to reach out. I would like to also share some upcoming ways to get involved. They'll also be included in the chat. as John mentioned, spread the word. We did, and we still do, and we're accepting applications for a new round in our COVID emergency fund, and are due on November 22nd. We have another round that's coming up related to vaccine awareness and access. So tune in. Also, another event that's coming up on November 24th for a panel on how foreign aid programs can include LGBTIQ people, and is co-hosted with the government of Germany. There's also another panel coming up. Attend the State and LGBTIQ Movement panel on December 1st to hear our own acting ED, Maria, and other key leaders reflect on 2021 and what's ahead for 2022. And that's hosted by the Horizons Foundation. Also, for an event that we have coming up, Outright has coming up, we have our Out Summit coming up. It's our 7th annual LGBT Global Human Rights Conference, and it'll be held on December 8th through the 10th. Also include in thinking about Giving Tuesday that's coming up. Giving Tuesday is a national day of philanthropy where you as an individual can join a community of givers and to make an impact in donations on one day to support nonprofits. We actually have a match this year, which is a triple match. So the first $20,000 in donations between Giving Tuesday and the end of the year will be triple match, and we can accept gifts of cash, stock, crypto, and more. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you all again for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day. On behalf of Outright, thank you so much.